when you look at the humanitarian sector and how payments are made in distressed areas and countries that are in conflict, et cetera, the system was broken.
In the humanitarian sector, there's a recognition now that where markets work, cash is the best form of humanitarian assistance. In the last 12 months, we've opened over 150,000 wallets for 150,000 families, and they've received more than $30 million of aid in the form of an Afghani stablecoin.
Let's say 5 or 10 years from now, what do you see as the main challenges that will be solved with blockchain in humanitarian aid?
Digital payments to beneficiaries in the form of stablecoins is going to be what the future is all about, particularly given that the aversion to corruption that so many donors have, right? Because this is a way to answer that corruption narrative.
Humanitarian aid struggles with trust, delays, and accountability. Technology and blockchain promises fixes, but results remain uneven. I'm Dr. Lorena Nessi from CCN, and today I'm joined by Nigel Pont, Senior Advisor for Humanitarian Affairs at HesabPay and the Algorand Foundation, and Matt Keller, Director of Impact and Inclusion at the Algorand Foundation. Together, we'll examine where blockchain genuinely helps humanitarian systems, where it falls short, and which ethical questions remain unresolved. Welcome, Nigel and Matt. Thanks for joining us today at CCN.
Thank you, Lorena.
Thank you, Lorena. Good to be here.
Very nice to see you here. So we're going to start with the very first question, which is about these real use cases that you think that Algorand might be bringing into the ecosystem to make a real impact, to make a change. Who would like to start?
When I start, Nigel, you just chime in whenever. The first, a few years ago, we really kind of backed a company in Afghanistan called HesabPay, which Nigel, as you mentioned, is part of. And the thinking was that when you look at the humanitarian sector and how payments are made in distressed areas and countries that are in conflict, et cetera, the system was broken. And we thought that HesabPay had the right answer as to how to get something of value from a donor organization like the United Nations World Food Program or whomever to the end beneficiary. And so we've been working with HesabPay, supporting them. And it's a real world use case on the ground in Afghanistan and now Syria that's been developing over the course of the past 3 years.
And how has it worked? What is, in simple terms, for our audience to understand what's the specific role of Algorand and HesabPay?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the specific role of Algorand is to really to invest and support the company HesabPay, because we believe in the humanitarian nature of what they're doing and what the end results are. And Nigel was, very early on in HesabPay and knows the intricacies of the system on the ground and why it's actually made a difference. So why don't you go dive deep into that, Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lorena, in the humanitarian sector, there's a recognition now that where markets work, cash is the best form of humanitarian assistance. Yeah, so if markets work, give people cash. It's the most dignified form of aid, and it helps people to make choices about how to deal with their immediate needs and recover from whatever crisis they've experienced. So historically, that cash has been delivered in an envelope as, tattered bills, or increasingly through sort of more traditional mobile money platforms. And now we're seeing a lot of that cash being transmitted on various blockchains. So what HesabPay has done in Afghanistan, in partnership with multiple humanitarian organizations, particularly some of the largest UN agencies, in the last 12 months, we've opened over 150,000 wallets for 150,000 families, and they've received more than $30 million of aid in the form of an Afghani stablecoin, a local token. It's minted on Algorand. And then the beneficiaries of that assistance, they are helped. A lot of them, it's their first time with any form of financial account. So we've really had to simplify the product to make it super easy and accessible for low literacy, low financial literacy, and low bandwidth environments. And then these recipients, they get their aid on chain, and then they can either cash out into paper fiat currency, or they can buy goods and services through our merchant acceptance network. So we've done that in Afghanistan, as I said, using a local token. And then in Syria, we've been ramping up for the last 8 or 9 months, and we're starting to get some traction there. So similar sort of background from a humanitarian perspective, but there it's possible for us to use USDC. And so USDC is the main sort of token flowing through the system. And we have an agent network that we've now built out in Syria. And we've got multiple aid organizations purchasing USDC, and then through the HesabPay platform, making payments to their beneficiaries, to vendors, to staff, etc. And it's transforming the way that money flows in the aid community in these contexts.
Brilliant. So what it's doing is solving access to money, right? Basically to these funds that they might be using for specific elements that they need.
Yeah, in these locations, financial infrastructure, these two locations, Afghanistan and Syria, they're very complex jurisdictions with a lot of sanctions, money laundering, terrorist financing, restrictions. And it's really important that, we need a compliance system that can work internationally across borders, but that's also highly transparent and, allows donors and the international community regulators to have, high levels of confidence that the money got where it was meant to be going. Yeah. And I think that's what a number of criticisms that have been leveled at the aid industry in recent years has been that there is that lack of transparency, which has led to a breakdown in trust as to where aid money ultimately ends up. So what we've been doing is we've really been tackling that problem head on, is like, how do we rebuild trust in where aid flows are going and make it verifiable as obviously it can be on a public chain.
So you have benefits on both ends. The benefit to the beneficiary is she receives something of value in a very safe, secure manner where she can spend it as she sees fit, which gives her the agency that comes with that. And then on the donor side, you've got the transparency that Nigel talked about. So you're solving two problems, right? You're solving the receipt of that assistance, and you're solving the appearance of corruption problem, sometimes real, a lot of it appearing as if corrupt, by making it transparent and traceable. So it's a pretty widespread solution to some seemingly intractable problems.
Absolutely. Problems that have been there for a while, especially talking about these agencies, right? So we are also talking about how it addresses these fragile environments and communities that really need support and protection. But are there any moments in which this help can put the individuals who are receiving the funds at risk, or that this aid might imply any risk or challenges?
Well, I'll point you to a London School of Economics study where they did a randomized trial with 2,500 women they followed who received the digital currency via the HesabPay wallet. And it turns out there's actually less risk. There's less violence done when somebody, particularly a woman, has something of value on her phone or on a card. That's very different than carrying cash around, which happens in a lot of distressed places. People actually receive big wads of cash, and you can imagine they're carrying it around, their targets. But this allows a certain amount of safety and a great amount of agency. And what they found is that when women receive something of value on their wallet they can spend, they spend it on their families. Families are less hungry, and things are much better.
That's really good. So actually, it's making risk a bit less of a challenge, as far as I understand.
Yeah, I think so.
So when we're talking about data and we're talking about transparency, how do you determine what humanitarian data should be never recorded on chain? Or is there any data that you actually think shouldn't be recorded on chain about these people who are receiving the funds, or any actors who are actually in this process?
Yeah, so data privacy and data protection is central to sort of modern humanitarianism. I mean, it's something that, humanitarian organizations and then the companies and the private entities that support them really have to get right, because obviously there are risks. Should personally identifiable information or demographically identifiable information or gender identifiable information, become publicly known. So using HesabPay as an example, we don't write any PII or DII to the chain. Yeah, so there's no way of associating a public wallet with a person's PII or DII from what's on chain, and we're very careful to limit that. I mean, I think the question about sort of data privacy and sort of the privacy of transactions on public chains is for good reason a heated debate in the real world applications, real world asset stablecoin community. And a lot of us would sort of say, well, we don't want our wouldn't want our bank account so that somebody could look at all the transactions we've made. Well, I think that's often the case, but these types of public payments are really one of the sort of the flip sides to that coin, because of the need for trust and transparency in how public or charitable donations are spent, and that they're not being abused in any way. So what we're really doing is sort of at the same time as preserving that privacy by not putting anything identifiable on chain, we're then using the nature of the sort of the data that does exist on chain to prove that yes, this assistance did get where it was meant to go. And we built a platform called the Aid Trust Portal, which I'm happy to share, and you can put a link in the text for people to follow. But what this allows aid organizations to do is just to upload all the public keys of any wallets they know are involved in a project, be that a recipient, their own wallet, the vendors, the agents, the merchants that are involved in any given project. And then they're able to, in real time, directly from the chain, visualize these flows of funds. And the initial feedback we're getting from the donor community and from the implementing organizations themselves is that this is a really attractive feature, because traditional block explorers, you can see the lines of transactions, etc., but then they don't have the most intuitive UI for understanding the relationship between large numbers of wallets and what's going. So we've really sort of dived into that at the Algorand Foundation to make sure that sort of aid that's distributed on the Algorand blockchain is as transparent as possible.
And that allows us to help change the narrative around aid itself. I mean, a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, USAID, which accounted for something like 30 to 40% of the world's aid, was decimated, was obliterated in a week or whatever it was, in a month. And part of the reasoning for that was that it's rampant corruption. It's everywhere. And that was the pretense, right? And while there is, for sure, money gets lost, money gets stolen, money gets misappropriated, etc., this is a way to say, okay, if that's your primary concern, well, here you go. You can see where every single dollar goes. And that should give you the comfort in knowing that what you're spending is actually being spent for something that it was intended to be spent for. So I think that's part of the bigger picture here, is that the aid community can't keep doing business as usual because the world has changed. So what are the tools that are available to the aid community that helps change the narrative and meet the new world where it is?
Absolutely. And in terms of adoption, we are talking about a huge step, because we are talking about deprived communities, generally speaking. Are they actually aware of using these high technologies for their finances, or do they see it just as simply as another app on their phones? How does that work?
Yeah, so we try to abstract away the blockchain complexities to the greatest extent possible to make it as simple and as easy to use as possible. As I've said, the majority of the people that we're dealing with, they've never had a bank account even. They may have a smartphone, they might have a feature phone, an old-fashioned Nokia type phone. But we've got it to the stage where we operate a custodial platform in a lot of these situations. So we're helping manage people's keys, and we're also providing people accounts on a basic PVC QR code card, which allows them to interact with their account without even needing a smartphone. Because even if they have a smartphone, maybe they don't have data, maybe there's no Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it as simple as possible for very disadvantaged people to use this. And we're not trying to explain, how to write down your seed phrase and how to protect this and get into the more complex aspects of blockchain and sort of DeFi. And as an example of this, one of the features that we built in HesabPay is that when you go to approve a transaction on an agent's phone, so the agent scans your QR code card, and then you say, please, can I, cash out 3,000 Afghanis? They enter 3,000 Afghanis and they request it. But then you as the user then have to enter your PIN into the agent's phone to approve that transaction. Well, what we've done is the phone now speaks to the user and says, so-and-so is trying to take 3,000 AFs from your account. And that it says it in the local language so that if the person can't read the text on the screen, they can hear it, which they'll obviously understand. And then everybody is able to just enter a few numbers on the pin, the keypad. So I think, we're taking every step possible to make it as simple as possible. And, these folks don't really need to know about the blockchain, but it's enabling us to deliver a kind of service which was hard to do before.
And I mean, remember, Afghanistan particularly has one of the highest illiteracy rates in the world, right? So these features are hugely important. And again, they meet
particularly
people
amongst women, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Brilliant. So these are some challenges that actually the technology is helping you to overcome. But what about security challenges for the users? Are any that they should be aware or that you are aware of as you are helping them to manage these accounts?
Yeah, I mean, the security challenges that they face are mostly related to the context in general and that they're a recipient of assistance. All of our research in that London School of Economics study that Matt referred to suggests that, providing this assistance digitally in essentially in a very low key manner so that people don't have to queue for hours in a very predictable location every month. And then, bad actors know that every single person leaving that destination has got a wallet, an envelope of cash in their pocket. Now what they're doing is, they receive the money, they get a text message saying you've received funds, and then they can go to any one of 80, 100 locations in their town at a time of their choosing and pick up their assistance, which, it dramatically reduces risk. It doesn't eliminate it, obviously, but it does make this type of assistance safer.
Brilliant. And you have talked, I'm aware that you have been working with many different initiatives in many countries. So what are the challenges in terms of regulation or different governments, in these different political and social contexts?
Well, we happen to pick some of the countries that are the most difficult. I mean, in Syria, for example, the regulation, I guess, doesn't really exist yet. It's in the process of becoming. So a lot of this is a case of first impression in places like Syria. In Afghanistan, there is regulation being formulated, right, Nige, but to a far greater extent than Syria. So it depends country to country, but Syria is kind of an extreme example. In Afghanistan, I guess regulation, better on the ground there, is in the process of becoming. But that makes it very tricky at times.
Yeah, I mean, a specific example of that is, in Afghanistan, crypto per se is banned. Yeah, which, that happened after we had built HesabPay. And, that was a tricky moment when when that happened. But then through negotiations with the regulator, the Central Bank of Afghanistan, we're able to make it very clear, look, we're a regulated electronic money institution. We're creating e-money. It happens to be tokens on a blockchain. And we're just using a blockchain as a decentralized, highly secure database. We're not using exchange traded tokens. There's no speculative nature to this. Obviously, in a lot of these countries, Sharia compliance is super important. And so we can't offer any yield bearing instruments on the platform. So, there's a lot of work to be done with local regulators in these environments. So what we're facing in the aid community is sort of dealing with sort of regulators at sort of two ends. One is from the sending end. It can be tricky to on-ramp funds in a Western, Northern European, or US jurisdiction. If to send to Syria or Afghanistan, it raises a lot of questions if you're trying to buy stables on the market for that kind of thing. So we're working with the regulators at that end of the spectrum and sort of in the sending jurisdictions. And then in the receiving jurisdictions, it's also quite complex and needs to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis.
Brilliant. So let's think about, let's say 5 or 10 years from now. What do you see as the main challenges that will be solved with blockchain in humanitarian aid, but also the main issues that might still be there?
So I'll start. We've convened something called the Humanitarian Payments Council, which has brought together this wildly eclectic mix of people and organizations, from Visa and MasterCard to United Nations World Food Program to UNHCR to WorldPay, to World Vision. And so these are all organizations and people trying to figure out, okay, here are the challenges. How do we meet these challenges? And it's the first of a kind, focused specifically on digital payments, particularly stablecoin in these distressed areas. And so with the convening of that council, you can see where, there's a saying that, you got to skate to where the puck is going, right? We can see that the puck is headed toward a place where digital payments to beneficiaries in the form of stablecoins is going to be what the future is all about, particularly given that the aversion to corruption that so many donors have, right? Because this is a way to answer that corruption narrative. So I think 5 to 10 years from now, since the trajectory of cash-based assistance has gone like this, 10, 15 years ago, it was minimal, right? It was de minimis. Now it's very high. And I think that will take the form of, electronic payment, particularly in stablecoins. Partly, I believe that because so many multilaterals and private sector companies are focused on this specifically. And so I see that as the trend. That's my kind of 5 to 10 year projection.
Yeah, so a couple of things I'd add to that. I mean, I think that sort of the next sort of problems that we're going to need to tackle are around identity and offline solutions. So obviously, decentralized self-sovereign identity on the blockchain is going to be really critical. Obviously, it's possible, but this is one of the great use cases. A lot of these people in these either the jurisdiction doesn't offer IDs, they're sort of undocumented people. But, once you start interacting with stable coins on the open market, you need to figure out, what's that KYC question? How does KYC interact with sort of identity-less people? So I think getting the identity piece right is going to be critical. And the second piece of that is, offline. So a lot of these, sort of the most vulnerable, most sort of distressed jurisdictions that we work in, have pretty rubbish internet. And so how do you make these solutions work in an offline environment with some sort of a biometric ID attached to them? So we're starting to work very closely with an amazing fintech called Paycode. They're a new partner of ours, and they are probably the leaders in the aid world right now in this decentralized ID biometrics component to that. And then also with the offline component. And so we're working with them to sort of bring stable coins on Algorand into their ecosystem and to make that work. So I think that's sort of in the next 5 years or so, I think if we can crack those two pieces, then we're going to really expand the sort of the scope of where we can work. And then I think in terms of sort of a few of the other pieces that we're going to see coming more is around smart contracts. And I think that as people increasingly look to sort of improve the efficiency of aid and make, in some cases, sort of around conditional aid, how do we combine smart contracts with the types of solutions we've been talking about before, particularly related to natural disasters, be they rapid onset, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, etc., and sort of more parametric insurance type products that can be layered onto these payment ecosystems. Or maybe if they are more like drought, slow onset natural disasters, where you can still, pull the data from the oracles about rainfall, et cetera, and you can make payout to herders, to farmers in remote locations. And so I think that type of technology is, there's some people piloting that, experimenting with how to apply that in these contexts, but we're likely to see that scale in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm pretty sure of that.
And that's not just in parts of the world where we work. It's also in places like the United States in terms of disaster relief, where parametric insurance could be a game changer, as well as a wallet that the survivor has that has that digital, that decentralized identity that allows that person to apply for various from various aid organizations to get what they need without it being duplicated. So that the disaster part of this is going to be, I think, a big deal all over the world in the next decade.
What do you mean? Is that a very apocalyptic view of it, Matt?
No, it's not. It's not apocalyptic. I think the reality is that when you look, we developed something called the Care Wallet, Care Survivor Wallet, in part because when you look at the way that the disaster community in the United States responds to disasters, it's unbelievably slow, and it's unbelievably bureaucratic, and it's paper-based, and the federal government talks to the state government, and the state government gets funds to the NGOs that then administer relief on the ground when people have been devastated by hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and a whole host of disasters that are growing in their strength and they're growing in their number due to a lot of different reasons, particularly climate change. So to have something in the hand of a survivor where that identity is immediately accepted by aid organizations, and it's streamlined, and it's no longer waiting in line, just like you see in Afghanistan for relief. That is, it's an answer to the apocalypse, Lorena. It's not the apocalypse itself, but it's an answer, and I think it's going to help a lot of people.
No, absolutely. It's the kind of thing that you see in sci-fi. Communities that are basically devastated, but that have access somehow to technologies that enable them to get what they need, right? To at least to get to fill up some of their needs. So
yeah, and it's just to get back up on their feet. These are the things that people need immediately after something strikes: food, clean water, access to, the kind of healthcare that comes with being in some of these things. So it's inevitable. It's the adoption, happens very, very slowly, and then it will happen all of a sudden.
what's the role of AI in all of this? Because you have mentioned some elements of it, but not directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the role that agents will play in some of these processes is going to be really interesting. And I don't think we know exactly what that's going to be, but where payments and agents interact, obviously, wallets and stable coins will be at the heart of whatever direction that goes in. And then I think the other bit of disaster relief where AI is sort of, or maybe it's more ML than AI, I don't know, but is around sort of rapid needs assessment. So what we're seeing is, some amazing organizations like Give Directly, for example, they're applying satellite imagery with cell phone data to really rapidly assess vulnerability in locations in dramatically, at scale, dramatically faster than could ever be done in a sort of a manual assessment. Who needs help? Assessing sort of the state of roofs in a community that's been hit by a hurricane to determine whether that household needs assistance. And then which cell phone is attached, is related to that home, and assistance can then get paid out directly. So I think we're starting to see that kind of automation and sort of scaling of needs assessment that, when combined with different pieces of this puzzle that AI is going to allow to happen much faster, is going to be pretty impressive.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Is there anything else that you think you should add before we say goodbye?
We're focused on this particular subject because there's a huge need, and technology can help kind of solve some of these problems. Often people will try to shoehorn technology in to fix a problem that it really can't solve with lots of different promises. But I think this is a real case of technology meeting a real need, and we're going to keep pushing for it until it's adopted at scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lorena, that the amount of humanitarian suffering in the world right now is astronomical. Yeah, if you look at Sudan and Syria and parts of Latin America and parts of Asia, there is huge amount of need out there, and aid budgets are being slashed. And so, the humanitarian community is having to prioritize more and more, who doesn't get aid, despite that being an incredibly hard task. So I think that sort of like, it's not really in the scope of many of us to sort of increase the amount of aid flowing through the taps. But what we can do as a community, sort of especially in this blockchain crypto space, is we can say, look, how do we apply this technology as effectively as possible to increase trust and efficiency in how aid is delivered? And hopefully that will, make sure that what aid there is goes further, but also increase the confidence of those who are providing assistance that actually, I can actually give a bit more here because I'm confident that it's going to go to the people I wanted it to.
And that's the role that we can play.
Well, good luck with it. I think it is really, as you said, it's a real use case that has all the potential to show some of the strengths, the biggest strengths of the technology of the blockchain. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep in touch as well. So
it's nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Great. Thanks, Lorena. Great speaking with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to speak
Bye.
to you.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.